"You walk through that door," the woman behind the bar said, her voice like a match dragged across stone, "and there's no walking it back. You understand that?" The stranger looked down at the $60 a man had just slid across the bar to her. She had $91 to her name, a bruise on her jaw she'd stopped explaining, and a husband 400 miles behind her who did not believe the word no. Every man in that room had already decided something about her. She just didn't know what yet. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that in 3 weeks, this bar full of the men the world tells you to fear would be the only thing standing between her and the man who owned her. Now, before we go any further, if you believe that a person's past should never be the thing that decides whether they deserve a little kindness, then do one small thing for me right now and hit that subscribe button. Because the people who judged this woman the second she walked through that door, they never would. And do me one more. Drop a comment and tell me what city, what town, what corner of the world you're watching from tonight. I genuinely want to see just how far this story is going to travel. She had $91, and she had already done the math a dozen times. The way you keep counting money that isn't going to grow no matter how many times your eyes pass over it. $91, folded once and pushed deep into the inside pocket of a coat that had been chosen for a Colorado spring and was no match at all for the coast in the fog. She drove with both hands on the wheel and the heater ticking and the gas needle sliding down toward a letter she didn't want to look at. And she drove west, because west was the direction the land ran out. And when the land ran out, there was nowhere left for anyone to follow. She had packed the bag over 2 weeks. That was the part she would think about later, on the nights she couldn't sleep. Not the leaving itself, which had taken 4 minutes at 4:40 in the morning, but the slow, careful assembling of it. A little at a time. Never enough at once. Never anything that would leave a gap on a shelf or a hanger swinging empty where he might notice it. A woman learns to pack a bag the way a prisoner learns to loosen a single brick, working at it in the dark, putting the dust back so no one sees the wall is coming down. She hadn't used the map on her phone. She wanted to. Everything in her wanted the small blue dot and the calm voice telling her where to turn, because she was tired in a way that went down past her bones and into some deeper place, and it would have been so easy to let a machine do the driving of her thoughts. But he had access to that phone. He had access to a great many things, and she knew it the way you know your own heartbeat, without needing proof. So she drove blind. She drove by the shape of the country, north and then west and then north again, until the road began to smell like salt, and the trees leaned inland the way trees do when the wind has been teaching them a lesson their whole lives. The town came out of the fog rather than appearing on any sign she trusted. A cluster of low lights burning underwater, or that was how it looked through the windshield and the mist. There was a diner with its windows lit gold and mostly empty. There was a bait shop, dark, a hand-painted marlin peeling off the boards above the door. And at the edge of the harbor road there was a long, low building that seemed to have been built to keep something out, or maybe to keep something in. Heavy door, small windows, and a row of motorcycles nosed up to it in a line, chrome beaded with the fog, patient as horses at a rail. Above the door a sign burned with the kind of light that doesn't so much welcome you as warn you off. And beneath it, smaller, weathered gray, a piece of board with words hand-lettered in black. She had to slow the car and lean toward the glass to read them. No questions. She sat in the lot with the engine running for warmth, and she looked at those 2 words for a long time. There was a version of this woman, and it hadn't been so long ago, who would have found that sign faintly alarming and driven on. That woman had run a department of 30 people. That woman had built timelines that ran to the hour, had walked into rooms full of men who thought they'd cornered her and walked back out with the contract, had been the person others came to when their careful plans fell apart. That woman had known exactly what she was worth, once. Somewhere in the last 7 years, someone had gone through her like a house at night, quietly turning off the lights room by room, until she'd forgotten which switches were even hers to reach. She didn't feel like that woman anymore, but something in her recognized the sign. No questions. For 7 years, she had been drowning in questions dressed up as concern, and here was a door that promised none. She turned off the engine and stepped out into the cold. She had learned something about doorways, and it was this: that hesitation is visible. That standing in a threshold looking uncertain is a kind of broadcast, and there are people in the world who listen for exactly that frequency and move toward it. So she gave herself 3 seconds, She had counted them, standing outside. The way she counted a great many things now, because counting made a thing finite, and a finite thing could be survived. And then she pushed the door open and stepped inside, and let it close behind her before her nerve could weigh in. The noise reached her first. Not the loud she had braced for, but something layered and warm. Low conversation coming from several directions at once, music with weight to it, a bass she could feel in her sternum, the crack of pool balls somewhere in the back. 20-some people, nearly all of them men, and not one of them the thing she had pictured. Not performing anything, not trying to be frightening, because they had no need to. They simply existed at a frequency that said, without a word, that this was their room, and she was a variable they had not yet decided what to do with. Several of them had already noticed her. She felt it the way you feel weather change, attention rotating a few degrees, a conversation shifting pitch without stopping. The woman behind the bar looked to be somewhere past 50, gray threaded through dark hair, a face that had stood out in a lot of years of weather and had made its peace with it. She was wiping down the bar with the automatic motion of a person who had done it 10,000 times and would do it 10,000 more. "We're full," she said, without looking up. "I'm not a customer." The words came out steadier than the woman felt. "I saw the card in the window." The rag stopped. The woman behind the bar looked at her now, and it was a different kind of looking than she was used to. For 7 years she had been looked at like inventory, assessed, priced, cataloged for what she could be to somebody. This was not that. This was someone weighing something she couldn't yet name. "You ever 10 bar?" "No, but I've managed a staff of 30. I've run budgets in the millions. I once sat across a table from a man who brought 3 lawyers with him, and I still walked out with what I came for. I can learn to pour a drink." The woman set the rag down on the counter and folded it, slowly, into a neat square. It was a small thing, that folding, but there was a deliberateness to it that the stranger recognized, the gesture of a person who is deciding something and wants a moment to do it in. "I'm Ilsa," she said. "This is my place. My rules apply inside these walls, and they don't bend for anybody. You show up when you say you will. You do the job in front of you. You don't talk about what you see or hear in this building to anyone outside it. And you don't bring your trouble through that door." She let that last one sit. "Whatever your problems are, they stay outside." The stranger held her eyes. She could have said what people say. She could have smiled and promised she was no trouble at all, the way she had learned to make herself small and smooth and easy to have around. But she was so tired of that, and this seemed like a place where the truth cost less than the performance. "I do have problems," she said. "I'm not going to stand here and pretend I don't. But they're mine to manage. Not yours." Ilsa looked at her for a long moment. Then she picked the rag back up. "You start tomorrow. 6 a.m. Not 6:05. And just like that, the woman had a job. She didn't have anywhere to sleep, and she had $91 and a whole country of trouble somewhere behind her in a coat she'd bought in another life. But she had a job. She let herself feel exactly that, and only that, for 5 seconds. The specific, animal relief of a person who has been falling for a long time and has finally felt something solid come up beneath her feet. 5 seconds. Then she started, quietly, on the next problem, because that was the only way she knew how to keep standing. "Hey." The voice came from a booth off to her left, and when she turned, there was a man watching her with the patience of someone who had been watching for a while and wasn't in any hurry to stop. Younger than most of the room, somewhere in his 30s, dark-haired, with a stillness about him that she had at first taken for boredom before she understood it was the opposite. A stillness that came from paying very close attention to everything and choosing to move none of it. "There's a room above the hardware store," he said. "Rents by the week. $40. Not the motel on the bay, that's $95. He reached into his jacket, and he slid a folded bill across the table until it sat beside her hand. $60. She looked at it. Then she looked at him. "I don't take charity," she said. "It's not charity. It's a loan. You pay it back out of your first check." He was already reaching for his jacket, already halfway to standing. "Ilsa hired you. And Ilsa doesn't hire fools. That's collateral enough for $60. She almost let him go, but the question was too large to hold in. "Why?" He stopped, without turning around. "Because $60, he said, shouldn't be the thing that stops somebody." And he walked away toward the back of the bar, and left her standing there holding the money. She would not have been able to explain, right then, what moved through her. It wasn't only gratitude, though it was that. It wasn't only relief, though it was that too. It was a stranger sensation, one she hadn't felt in so long she'd half forgotten it existed. The feeling of being seen without being exposed. Of someone understanding exactly what was happening to her, without requiring her to say a single word of it out loud. He had read her checked pocket, her too thin coat, her half-second pauses, and he had simply set $60 on a table and named the terms and walked away, and asked nothing of her in return, not even the small change of her explanation. She tucked the money into her pocket, and she looked at the room one more time. The light, the smoke, the men the world would have told her to fear, and she walked out into the fog. The room above the hardware store was exactly $40, and the woman who rented it to her took the cash and asked her nothing at all, and the stranger felt a rush of pure, uncomplicated gratitude for that anonymity. The room was small and clean enough. A bed, a window that looked at nothing, a lock that turned. She sat down on the edge of the mattress, and, for a while, she did not move. She was safe. That was the sentence she kept coming back to, turning it over like an object she wasn't sure how to hold. She was safe tonight. Tomorrow she had a job. The day after that she didn't know, but tonight she was safe, and tomorrow she had a job, and that was more than she'd had that morning. And then, sitting on the edge of a stranger's bed in a town she couldn't have found on purpose, she began to cry. Not the crying she had trained herself into over the years. The silent, careful, efficient kind she did in the shower so he wouldn't hear, in and out of it in under 3 minutes with her face composed again before she stepped out. This was the other kind. The kind that starts somewhere underneath language and moves through the whole body like weather. She didn't manage it. She didn't make it smaller or quieter or quicker. For the first time in longer than she could clearly remember, she just let it happen, and she let it take as long as it needed to take, until at last it was finished on its own. Then she washed her face in the small sink, and she set an alarm, and she slept. She was standing behind the bar at the Salt House at 3 minutes before 6 the next morning, and she understood, without being told, that those 3 minutes were the entire point of the exercise. Ilsa was already there, moving through some private routine of invoices and inventory with the ease of a person who had opened this room 10,000 mornings and would open it 10,000 more. When the door swung in out of the dark, she lifted her eyes to the clock on the wall, and then to the woman coming through it, and she said nothing at all. And the woman took the silence for exactly what it was, which was approval. And she was learning, already, that approval in this place was a quiet currency, spent rarely, and worth more for the rarity of the spending. The doors did not open to customers until 11, and those first hours belonged to the learning of the place. Ilsa showed her where things lived and how things worked with the brisk economy of someone who intended to explain each thing precisely once. Where the stock was kept, how the register ran. An older system, but forgiving if you paid it a little attention. What to say when the phone rang, which was almost always some version of "we'll have to check on that." And the woman watched, and she remembered, because remembering had always come easily to her, and because she had learned in the hardest possible school that being useful was the one patch of solid ground a person could stand on when every other kind of ground had gone out from under them. But she did more than remember where the bottles were. She had spent her whole working life reading the insides of things, learning how a system moved, where it caught and bound, where the small failures hid themselves years before they grew into the large ones that everybody finally noticed. It was the thing she had been best at, back in the life where she had been permitted to be good at things out loud. And it did not switch off simply because the setting had changed from a boardroom to a bar. Within 3 days, without setting down a single word of it on paper, she had the whole of the Salt House mapped in her head as cleanly as any chart she had ever drawn. Not the surface of it, the rules Ilsa had recited that first night, but the machinery underneath. The way the room actually ran. She saw that the shelves behind the bar were arranged in an order that made no sense. The bottles reached for 100 times a night, standing patiently behind the ones nobody touched from 1 month to the next, so that every single pour cost a few wasted seconds and 1 wasted reach. A tiny tax, paid over and over, all night, every night. She saw that the drinks coming out of the well were too sweet, that people ordered one out of curiosity and left half of it sitting on the bar and never came back for a second, while the bourbon and the plain cold beer carried nearly the whole weight of what the place sold. And she began, quietly, without announcing it, to keep a record. Nothing official. Just a small notebook tucked into her apron, in which she tallied, night after night, what people ordered and what they came back for and what they abandoned unfinished, the way a patient doctor tracks a set of symptoms until the shape of the thing underneath swims slowly into focus. On her fifth morning, before the doors were unlocked, she set the notebook on the bar in front of Ilsa. She let her read it, the columns and the tally marks, the weeks of watching gathered into a few quiet pages. Ilsa read it for a long time, and when she looked up, there was something working behind her eyes, some slow recalibration of the woman she had hired off nothing but the nerve it took to walk through the door. The kid before you, Ilsa said, never did anything like this. I don't know what the kid before me did, the woman answered. I only know what I see. Ilsa looked at her a moment longer, and the woman had the distinct sense of a scale somewhere quietly coming to rest. And that small, ordinary exchange, over a notebook, in an empty bar, before the fog had even burned off the harbor, was the true beginning of it. Not the drive, not the sign, not even the $60 slid across a table by a man who asked for nothing. The moment a room full of the men the world had told her to fear began, without any of them quite deciding to look at her and see not a stray who had wandered in out of the cold, but someone they were going to be glad, someday soon, they had let stay. I want to stop here for just a moment, before we go any further, because there is something you should know about where this story is going. Somewhere out there, 400 miles east of that little bar in the fog, there is a man who spent 7 years of this woman's life quietly turning off the lights inside her, one room at a time, until she'd forgotten which switches were even hers to reach. He is not finished with her. He does not believe, for 1 second, that she is allowed to simply walk out a door and become someone new. And he is coming. If you have ever in your life watched someone try to shrink a person who did not deserve to be made small, a friend, a sister, a daughter, maybe once upon a time yourself, then do one thing for me before we go on. Comment the words "I see her." Let's fill this part of the story with people who refuse to look away, because she is about to need every one of them. She would think, much later, about how strange it was that a life can turn on so little. $91. A card in a window. A notebook in an apron pocket. She had walked into that town with nothing but a packed bag and a promise she'd made to herself in a cold parking lot. And she had assumed, the way you assume the sun will keep its distance, that safety, if it came at all, would come slowly, grudgingly, in pieces she'd have to fight for one at a time. She did not yet understand that she had already begun, that first gray morning behind the bar, to build the very thing that would save her. She only knew that she was tired, and that she was, for tonight at least, somewhere no one could find her, and that in the morning there would be work, and that the work was hers. So she poured the drinks, and she learned the register, and she filled the small notebook a page at a time. And the fog came in off the harbor every evening and erased the world past the parking lot, and inside the light stayed gold, and the woman who had arrived with nothing kept her hands moving and her eyes open, and did not yet know that the man with the clean hands had already started east. She was behind the bar at the Salt House at 5 minutes before 6 the next morning, which she took, correctly, to be the entire point. Ilsa was already there, doing something with a clipboard and a stack of invoices, and when the door opened she glanced up at the clock on the wall, and then at the woman coming through it, and she said nothing at all. The woman took the silence for what it was, which was approval, and she understood already that approval in this place was a quiet currency, spent sparingly, and worth more for the spending. The bar didn't open to customers until 11, and the hours between her arrival and then became the beginning of an education. Ilsa showed her where things were with the efficiency of someone who had explained it exactly once to a great many people and expected them to remember. Where the stock was kept and how the register worked, which was an older system but a forgiving one if you paid attention, and what to say when the phone rang, which was almost always some version of "we'll have to check on that." And the woman watched, and she remembered, because remembering was a thing she had always been good at, and because she had learned that being useful was the surest ground a person could stand on when every other kind of ground had been pulled out from under them. But she did more than watch. She had spent her whole working life reading systems, learning how they moved, where they bound up, where the small breakdowns hid before they grew into the large ones. It was the thing she had been best at, back when she had been permitted to be good at things. And within 3 days, without ever writing a word of it down, she had the whole of the Salt House mapped in her head as clearly as any organizational chart she had ever drawn. Not the rules Ilsa had recited, those were the surface. Underneath them ran the real thing, a web of habits and relationships and unspoken agreements that governed everything from who sat where to who spoke first to which subjects were open and which were sealed behind a wall of careful silence. She noticed, for instance, that the shelves behind the bar were arranged in an order that made no sense, the bottles people reached for most often standing behind the ones they almost never touched, so that every pour cost a few unnecessary seconds and a small unnecessary reach. She noticed that the cocktails coming out of the well were too sweet, that people ordered one out of curiosity or politeness and never came back for a second, while the bourbon and the domestic beer accounted for the overwhelming share of everything the bar sold. She began, quietly, to keep a record of it, not on any official pad, but just a small notebook she kept in her apron, in which she tracked, night after night, what people ordered and what they reordered and what they left half-finished on the bar, the way a doctor might track a set of symptoms until the shape of the illness became clear. On her 5th morning, before the doors opened, she set the notebook on the bar in front of Ilsa and told her what she had found, that the house cocktails were driving customers away rather than bringing them back, that the well was arranged for a left-handed bartender who no longer worked there, if one ever had, that a handful of small changes, nothing that touched what the place was, nothing that anyone drinking there would experience as a change at all, could lift what the bar took in by something close to a fifth inside a month, and she thought that estimate was a conservative one. Ilsa looked at the notebook for a long time. She read the columns of it, the tallies and the little notations, the weeks of quiet attention gathered on the pages. "The kid before you," she said at last, "never did anything like this." "I don't know what the kid before me did," the woman said. "I only know what I see." Ilsa folded her arms and studied her, and there was something new in the study now, some recalibration going on behind her eyes. The woman was learning, a person who made decisions all the way through. Not the endless waffling of someone unsure of themselves, but the slow, complete consideration that comes before a real commitment. "Fix the cocktails," Ilsa said. "Show me what you want to change. We'll run it 2 weeks. You're right, or you're wrong, and we'll know." She was right. In 2 weeks the numbers had climbed nearly 40%. People who had ordered a single drink and never a second were ordering a third and a fourth. And one of the recipes she'd built in those 2 weeks, a dark, low-sweet whiskey sour with something bracing underneath it, had climbed all the way to the 3rd most ordered drink in the house. She'd needed a name for the board, and standing at the window one evening watching the mist roll in off the harbor and erase the world past the parking lot, she'd written Fog Line on the chalk, and the name had stuck the way the right name does, until regulars were ordering it before they'd taken their coats off. Ilsa stood at the bar one afternoon reading the week's totals, and she was quiet for a good while, in that way she had. Then she set the page down and she looked at the woman she had hired off the strength of a card in a window, and she asked her a question that changed the shape of everything that came after. "What else do you see?" It was a small question, for words. But the woman understood exactly what it meant, because she had spent a career learning what it meant when the person at the center of a thing stops treating you like a set of hands and starts treating you like a set of eyes. It meant the trust had turned. It meant she was inside now, in some way she hadn't been the week before. She had walked in with $91 and a duffel bag and a sign that asked no questions, and somewhere in the pouring of drinks and the keeping of a small notebook, she had become someone this room could not so easily do without. She let herself feel it for a moment, and then she told Ilsa the next thing she saw, because that was the job, and the job was the only thing that had been reliably holding her upright. It was in the 2nd week, on a Tuesday, in the flat quiet of a mid-afternoon, that the first one came. She knew him before he'd fully crossed the room. It was a specific kind of knowledge, one she had developed over years of reading a man's moods before she knew her own, a knowledge that operated faster than thought, in the body, in the animal part of the brain that keeps watch even when the rest of you is exhausted. He was in his early 40s, and he was dressed in the particular way of a man who did not usually go to bars like this one, a jacket without a mark on it, a pressed shirt, shoes that had never once met a floor with sawdust or spilled beer on it. He came in the way a man comes into a place he has been paid to come into. He sat at the bar, and he smiled at her, and the smile was doing a great deal of work. "Afternoon," he said. "Nice place. Thanks. What can I get you?" "Just a beer." "Whatever's on." She poured it and set it down, and she felt the shape of what was coming the way you feel a change in the pressure before a storm you can't yet see. "I'm looking for someone," he said, after a moment, still smiling. "A woman, blonde, mid-30s. Came out of Colorado. Would have turned up somewhere around here in the last few weeks. Driving a blue Ford, Colorado plates. Any of that ring a bell?" The bar was quiet enough that a man in a booth across the room could have heard every word, and she was aware, without looking, that one of them did. She kept her face exactly as it was. 7 years of practice sat behind that stillness. 7 years of learning to keep every reaction off her features while a storm went on behind them, and it held now, perfectly, not a muscle moving out of place. "A lot of people come through," she said. "I don't really keep track of them." Sure. The smile shifted a degree. Not hostile. Not yet. But something behind the eyes was doing arithmetic. He reached into his jacket and set a card face down on the bar. "If anything comes back to you, my employer is very motivated to find her. Very grateful to anyone who helps him do it." She picked up the card without turning it over, and she set it back down, face down, unread. "I'll keep that in mind." He drank half the beer, left a bill on the bar that was several times what it cost, and walked out into the fog. She did not move for a moment. She was aware of her own breathing, and of the way her hands wanted to shake, and of the way she was not going to let them. And then the man from the booth was at the end of the bar. She had not heard him cross the room. She never did. But he was simply there, the way he had a way of simply being there, and he was looking at the door the stranger had gone out through. "You knew him," he said. It was not a question. "I didn't recognize him," she said honestly. "But I know who sent him." He was quiet for a moment. "How long?" he said. "Have you got?" She understood the question underneath the question. "I don't know. He's patient when he wants to be." And here is the thing she did not say out loud, not yet, but which had been true for 7 years and was the engine of everything that was now bearing down on her from across 2 states. The man who had sent the scout, his name was Grant Ashby, did not accept the word no. Not from a business partner, not from a rival, not from a court, which he navigated with the fluency that only a great deal of money can buy, and not, ever, from his wife. He was not, whatever else he was, a man who threw the rock himself. That was the thing about him that had taken her years to understand, and understanding it had cost her more than she liked to count. Grant Ashby did not come at you with his own 2 hands. He found the people who were already holding a rock, already angry, already frightened, already looking for a direction to throw, and he simply gave them one. He pointed. He funded. He suggested. And then he stood a clean distance back with his clean hands folded while somebody else did the breaking. And when it was done, there was never a mark on him, never a thing you could hold up to the light and say, this is what he did. The scout in the pressed shirt was not a threat in himself. He was a finger testing the water. The hand that had sent him was still 400 miles away, and it was patient, and it was coming. I want to stop here for just a moment, because you have now met the man behind all of this. And you've met the particular kind of danger he is, the kind who never gets his own hands dirty, who spins other people's anger so his own record stays spotless. If men like that make your blood boil, do me one small thing. Hit that like button. It costs you nothing, and it tells YouTube to carry this story to more people who stand against exactly this kind of thing. The trolls won't touch it. But you're not one of them. You've been here the whole time. Now, she could have let the fear own the rest of that week, and there were versions of her, older ones, who would have. But she had made herself a promise in a cold parking lot on the morning of her first shift, and the promise was simple, and she kept it the only way promises are ever kept, which is by keeping it again every single day. And so she did the thing she had always done. She kept moving, and she kept building, and she made herself, deliberately, a little more necessary to this place with every shift, because necessity was the closest thing to safety she had ever been able to manufacture for herself. She rented an apartment. It was small, smaller than anything she'd lived in since her 20s. The kitchen was barely a kitchen. The window in the front room looked directly at a brick wall, close enough to touch if the glass hadn't been in the way. She stood in the empty main room on a gray afternoon with the key in her hand, and she felt something she had no clean word for and did not try to name, because naming it might have broken it. It was hers. That was the whole of it. Just hers, in a way that nothing had been entirely hers for 7 years. No room in the house she had shared with Grant had ever truly been her own. She understood that now, standing in 11 feet by 14, with a radiator that knocked and a lock that turned. Every room in that other house had been his room too, filled with his preferences and his rules, and that particular quality of presence he had, the way it expanded to fill whatever space it entered, until there was no corner of her own life she could stand in and breathe. This room was too small to fill. It had a lock, and the lock was hers, and no one else on this earth had a key to it. She set her bag down in the corner. She was home. It was the man from the booth who told her, a few days later, that the scout had not been the only visit. That men had been asking around town, at the diner on the main road, at the bait shop, at the gas station out by the highway, where someone had offered $100, cash, to anyone who could put a name and a place to a blonde woman from Colorado. Her hands did not stop what they were doing while he told her this. She had gotten good, again, at keeping her hands moving while the ground shifted. What did they say, she asked. The people, he asked. Nothing useful. And she understood, from the flat certainty of the way he said it, that the reason nothing useful had been said was that he had already been there. That before she had even known the questions were being asked, he had gone quietly ahead of them and made certain there were no useful answers to give. He had been running interference for weeks, without telling her, without turning it into a thing she had to carry or thank him for, or perform her gratitude over. It had simply happened, out of sight, because somewhere along the line this room full of the men the world told you to fear had decided that she was theirs to look after, and had gone about looking after her without troubling her about it at all. She set down the glass she was drying, and she looked at him. How long have you been doing that? He met her eyes. Since the first one. Don't, she said. Don't, he agreed, not unkindly, and let it go. And that letting it go, that refusal to make her owe him anything for it, was somehow the largest part of the kindness. The second scout came the following week, and he was better than the first. She knew what he was the moment he walked in, because he had the same quality the first one had, that too smooth performance of a man being casual on purpose. But he was smarter, or he had been better prepared. He didn't ask about her. He didn't mention a blonde woman, or Colorado, or a blue Ford. He asked general things, about the town, about how long the bar had been there, about whether it was a decent place for a man to stop if he was just passing through. And she answered every one of them, warmly, helpfully, with a specific kind of open friendliness that handed over nothing at all while appearing to hand over everything. He left 40 minutes later no wiser than he'd come, and she watched him go, and her stomach was cold, because the second visit told her something the first one hadn't. He was refining. He was narrowing the search. He had moved from casting wide to closing in, and the closing in was pointed at this coast, and he was patient enough to keep sending others ahead of him rather than showing his own face, because he wanted his information complete before he ever set foot in the room. He always had. He never walked into anything without knowing the ground first. That evening, after the doors were locked and Ilsa sat at the back table doing the night's accounting, the woman went to her and told her the truth. Not the personal history, not yet, not the 7 years and the packed bag and the bruise that had finally gone, but the operational shape of it. 2 men now, sent to find her. A husband 400 miles east with money and motive and the patience to spend both. A threat that had gone from wide and vague to narrow and near in the space of 2 weeks. Ilsa listened without once interrupting, which the woman was learning was simply how Ilsa listened to bad news. With her full attention and none of her reaction, the way a person listens who has heard a great deal of bad news over a long life and knows the first thing it asks of you is silence. Why are you telling me now? Ilsa said, when she had finished. Because the second visit means it's speeding up. And you told me the first day, problems stay outside. I'm trying to tell you before it becomes yours. It's already mine, Ilsa said. She set down her pen. Somebody's been sending people into my bar. That happened the moment the first one walked through that door. She looked up. You did the right thing, telling me. It's not an easy thing, the right thing. I've noticed you do it anyway. And the woman didn't have anything to say to that, because there was nothing she could say that wouldn't have made it smaller than it was. And so she said nothing, and went home to the small room with the lock that was hers, and lay in the dark listening to the coast breathe against the building, and did not sleep for a long while. The night the whole careful thing was tested came on a Wednesday, and she would remember that always, the sheer ordinary Wednesdayness of it. She had learned, in business and in marriage both, that trouble almost never arrives when you are braced for it. It comes on the settled days, the midweek days, when your guard has found its resting place and your body has decided, somewhere below thought, that today is not the day. It was mid-evening, the bar at a comfortable, medium hum, busy, but not full. She was working a 4-drink order at the rail when a young man came through the door, and the whole temperature of the room changed. She felt it before she saw it, the way a room shifts when something is wrong. The conversations not stopping, which would have been too obvious, but changing pitch, the attention in the place rotating toward the door like iron filings turning to a magnet. He was young, 22 at the most, lean, not tall, wearing a cut she'd learned in her weeks here to recognize. A prospect, the newest and least protected rank of the club that called this bar home. But it was his face that stopped her cold. He had the look of a person who had just done something that could not be undone, and was still in the first terrible minutes of understanding exactly how far it could not be undone. His hands were shaking, not a little, visibly, and she set down the drink she was holding, and she watched him scan the room with something close to panic in his eyes, and she thought, the way she had always thought at the start of every crisis she had ever walked into. All right, I see it now. Now I need to understand it. She did not go and get Ilsa. That was the first decision, and she made it in the space of a breath, before the young man had even reached the bar. Because she had learned something about this room in her weeks inside it, and the thing she had learned was that Ilsa was the center of it. Not loudly, not by insisting on it, but the way a planet is the center of the things that orbit it, so that everyone in the place arranged themselves around her without appearing to try. And that gravity, which was a gift in 100 ordinary moments, was exactly the wrong tool for what was walking through the door. Ilsa coming out would make this about the club. And whatever this was, it was not about the club yet. It was about a mistake, and a misunderstanding built on top of the mistake, and misunderstandings need a neutral voice before they need a powerful one. So she let Ilsa stay in the back, unaware, and she moved down the bar toward the boy herself. His name was Danny, and he told her the whole of it in a low, fast, shaking voice, glancing at the door every few seconds as he spoke. He had been running documents for the club, legitimate club business, meeting minutes and a schedule for the coming month, nothing that any person in their right mind would want. He'd picked them up at a meeting point out on the coast road, the way he'd done a dozen times before. But someone had arranged things so that it looked, to certain people, as though he were carrying something else, something valuable, something worth taking. And now there were 3 men in the parking lot who believed he had it, who had followed him from the coast road through the fog, and who were not, when he tried to explain, in any mood to be told they'd been misinformed. She listened, and while she listened, some cold, clear part of her mind was already 3 moves ahead, laying the situation out the way she used to lay out a negotiation. And what that part of her saw was this. The men outside believed the boy had something he did not have, which meant this was the worst kind of standoff there is, a confrontation built on false information, because neither side could give the other what it was actually asking for. The men couldn't get the thing, because the thing did not exist. The boy couldn't prove a negative to men who had already decided. It could only be broken by changing what was being asked. And there was one more thing she saw, sitting underneath all of it like a stone at the bottom of a clear pool, though she did not say it aloud yet. This had the shape of something arranged. Someone had fed these men their false information on purpose. Someone had lit this fuse and pointed it at this bar. And she had met, only days before, the fingerprints of a man who did precisely that, who never threw the rock, who only ever handed one to somebody already angry and gave them a direction. How many of them are out there? She asked. 3, Danny said. And what were you actually carrying? He told her. Papers. Minutes. A roster of names that meant nothing to anyone outside the club and very little to anyone in it. Do you have them on you? He reached into his cut and produced a sealed envelope, and she took it from him and looked at it, and she made the next decision. Stay behind the bar, she said. Whatever happens out there, you stay in here. You don't come out that door. You're not going out there, he said. I'm going to the doorway, she said. That's different from outside. The doorway is still mine. She caught the eye of the man in the booth as she came around the end of the bar. Reyes, still and watchful as he always was, and he raised one hand, palm flat toward her, which she had learned in her weeks here meant I am behind you, not ahead of you. She nodded, and she walked to the front of the bar, and she opened the door, and she stepped into the threshold of it, and not 1 inch past. The threshold mattered. She had learned that across 100 negotiating tables, in the days when the table itself carried meaning, when where a person chose to stand told you everything about what they thought they were owed. To step out into the lot would be to become a supplicant, one more small figure in a parking lot full of trouble. To hide behind the door would be to concede that the trouble owned the ground. But the threshold was hers. It said, without a word, this far and no farther, and everything behind me is mine. The 3 men were where Danny had said they'd be, and they had the specific posture of men who had agreed to wait, but were fast running out of the patience for it. 1 was on a phone. 2 were watching the door. They saw her, and she watched them adjust to the fact that what had come out of the door was not what they'd expected. Evening, she said. The one on the phone lowered it. All 3 were looking at her now. I manage this place, she said, her voice even, conversational, pitched exactly to the register of a woman discussing nothing of consequence. Which means when something happens in my parking lot, it's my parking lot. The kid works for me. He tells me you've got some concerns about a delivery. She held up the envelope, letting them see it without offering it. He asked me to show you this. I haven't opened it. I'm not going to. That's his to open, if he chooses. But he wanted you to know it exists, and that it isn't what you were told it was. The nearest one's eyes narrowed a fraction. Who are you? I'm the person, she said, standing between a misunderstanding and something everyone in this parking lot is going to spend a long time regretting. Somebody gave you bad information. I don't know who, and I'm not going to stand here and guess out loud. But it was wrong, and I think part of you already suspects it was wrong, or you'd have come through that door an hour ago instead of standing out here in the cold. She let that settle, and then she stepped back, fully, into the doorway. Come in. Sit down. Give it 20 minutes. If you feel the same at the end of 20 minutes, you walk out and you handle it however you choose, and I won't be able to stop you. But give it the 20 minutes first. I've never once seen standing in a parking lot solve anything. Sitting down solves at least the first part of it. Nobody moved. Then the one who had been on the phone, the one the other 2 kept angling toward, which told her he was the one whose mind actually mattered, looked at the envelope and looked at her, and something in his shoulders changed. And he came toward the door. The other 2 followed, with the specific reluctance of men who understood they were making a choice and not being maneuvered into one, which was exactly the distinction she had needed them to feel. She stepped aside and let them pass. Inside, she sat them at the bar and poured them each something that was not water, because she had learned that giving a frightened, angry person something to do with their hands can interrupt the circuit long enough to let reason back into the room. And she called Danny over, and she set the envelope in front of him, and she told him to open it. And he did. Spread the papers out on the dark wood, the minutes and the schedule and the roster of names. Exactly what he had said. Exactly nothing that any man would have staged a confrontation to steal. And the one who mattered looked at those pages for a long time, and then something went out of him. Some held tension, and it was replaced by the slow, sick understanding of a man who has just realized he was used. Somebody sent us out here, he said, to no one in particular. Yes, she said, and whoever it was is going to be very interested in how tonight ends. Which is one more good reason for tonight to end well. The 20 minutes became 2 hours. And by the time the 3 of them left, and they did leave, without a blow struck, without a bottle broken, Ilsa had come quietly out of the back and stood at the end of the bar, having needed no one to tell her what was happening, and she had a name. The name of the person, inside the club's own circle, who had fed those men their false information. It sat in the room after the door closed like a stone dropped into still water, the rings of it spreading out into a silence that everyone at the bar could feel. Ilsa came to stand beside her, one of the untouched glasses in her hand, and she looked at it for a while before she spoke. How did you know? She said. To keep me out of it at the start. Because you coming out would have made it about the club, the woman said. And it wasn't about the club yet. It was a misunderstanding. Misunderstandings need a neutral voice first, and you're not neutral. You're Ilsa. Your weight in a room changes the room the second you walk into it. I needed the room to stay movable, so I needed it to stay mine a little longer. Ilsa looked at her for a long moment. That, she said, is the smartest thing anyone has said in this bar in 12 years. I want to pause here, because you just watched something. That woman walked out into a parking lot full of angry men, in the fog, alone, to stand between them and a kid who wasn't even hers to protect, a kid she'd known for a matter of weeks. She had every reason to stay behind the bar and let it play out. She didn't. If you'd want someone like her in your corner on the worst night of your life, do one thing for me. Comment the words 20 minutes. You'll know exactly what it means, because you've been here the whole way. Let's see how many of us there are. In the days that followed, something shifted between the woman and the boy. He started turning up on the busy nights, unasked, unpaid, taking on small tasks with the serious industry of a young man, trying very hard to demonstrate something, that he had heard the lesson, that he was worth the trouble he'd nearly caused. And she let him, and she gave him a little more each time, small things she could check without making the checking obvious, and she watched him do each one as though his life depended on getting it right. He had questions, too, real ones, not the uncertain deflections of a boy performing competence, but the direct, concrete questions of someone genuinely trying to learn how she did the things she did. And she found herself, without quite deciding to, teaching him. Teaching him to walk into a room full of pressure and find the third option, the one nobody in the room believed was there. It was the thing she was best at. It was the thing 7 years had nearly made her forget she could do it all. And there was something in giving it away to a 22-year-old kid who wanted it that felt like getting a piece of herself back. But underneath the warmth of those days ran a cold current, and both she and the man in the booth knew it. "The scouts won't get him what he wants," she said to him, one afternoon, drying glasses while the light went gray in the windows. "He'll figure that out, and then he'll come himself. When he does," Reyes said, "it won't be a conversation." "I know that." He looked at her. "Are you afraid?" She considered the question honestly, because she had learned that this room had an unusual tolerance for honesty, and that a direct answer was worth more here than a careful one. "Yes," she said. "I'm afraid, but it doesn't change what I'm going to do." "And what are you going to do?" She set the glass on the rack. "Keep working," she said. "Keep building. Make myself so necessary to this place that by the time he gets here, the whole situation is different than the one he's planning for. He's expecting to find the woman who left him." She looked up and met his eyes, and there was something settled in her face that hadn't been there the day she walked in out of the cold. "He's not going to find her. She's not here anymore. He's going to find whoever it is I've become, and I'm still working that out, day to day. But I know one thing about her already." "What's that?" "She's not afraid of him," she said. "Not the way the other one was." Reyes held her gaze a moment longer, and then he looked away, out toward the fog gathering past the glass, and he said, very quietly, "No, she's not." And he picked up his drink, and he let the silence be, because he was a man who understood that some things need room to breathe. And outside, for 100 miles to the east and closing, the man with the clean hands was making his arrangements, and taking his time, and coming. He came on a Saturday, and she had known that it would be a Saturday, because Grant Ashby understood the private mechanics of timing the way other men understand a trade. He had built an entire life on it. The choosing of when to deliver news, when to make an offer, when to arrive. And Saturdays had always been his favorite, because on a Saturday people are off their guard, the week's armor set down, the ordinary rhythms loosened just enough to leave a gap a careful man could step through. He had told her that once, early on, back when she had still found his strategic mind a thing to admire rather than a thing to survive. The best time to walk into any room, he had said, is when the room isn't expecting you. She had turned that sentence over a great many times in the 3 days since the second scout, in the cold hours before dawn, and she had decided, quietly, that this time the room was going to be expecting him after all. The phone on the bar buzzed at 9:15 that morning, while she was doing the pre-open inventory. A small ritual she had introduced her second week, which had in the weeks since cut ordering errors by nearly half. She looked at the screen. An unknown number, a Montana area code. And she knew. She let it buzz once, twice, 3 times, 4, while something cold and familiar unfolded itself in her chest. Then she answered. "Hello, Nora." His voice was exactly as she remembered it, warm and modulated, the voice of a man who had spent decades using his own voice as a precision instrument. "You're looking well, from what I hear." "Grant." Her own voice came out level. She had practiced level. She had stood in the small bathroom of her small apartment that morning and said his name aloud 6 times, until it had worn down into something that sounded like any other word. "I thought we should talk," he said. "Before I come by." "Come by where?" There was a pause. Brief, almost nothing. But she had spent 7 years reading the pauses of this man, and this one told her that she had already done something he hadn't planned for. "The bar," he said. "You've made quite an impression on the locals, from what I understand." "You're welcome to come in," she said. "We open at 11. And there it was, the frame he had reached for, taken gently out of his hands and set down. He had wanted the call to be a negotiation, a way to establish the terms of things before he ever arrived, to feel out the ground. She had turned it into what it was to her now, a man asking after the hours of a business where she worked. She could hear him recalibrating in the silence. "Nora, I'll see you at 11, Grant. Have a good morning." She hung up. She set the phone down on the bar, and her hands were shaking. She could see the fine tremor running through her fingers, and she pressed both palms flat against the cool wood of the bar and breathed through it and counted. 10 seconds. She counted every one, because counting made the thing finite, and a finite thing could be survived. Then she picked up the clipboard, and she went back to the inventory, because the inventory was hers, and the work was the thing that had been holding her upright since the morning she walked in out of the fog. She found Ilsa in the back a little later and told her that Grant had called, that he would be there at 11. Ilsa listened and set down her pen and asked her the only 2 questions that mattered, whether she was all right and who she wanted on the floor. And the woman told her, the man from the booth, and the boy if he could be reached, but nobody positioned in any obvious way. She needed it to look like an ordinary Saturday, and Ilsa nodded and said it would. It was later still, from the boy, that she learned the thing that undid her a little, quietly, privately, in a way she did not let show. Because the boy had been in the back office when Ilsa had spoken to the senior men about what was coming, and he reported it to her afterward with the careful precision of someone delivering information he understood to be important. Ilsa had said 4 words. She had said, "Let her lead it." And the woman had gone very still when he told her, and then she had nodded and gone back to restocking the well. But inside, those 4 words had done something that would not be undone, because Ilsa led everything. Ilsa was the fixed point that the whole of that room turned around, and in all her years running the place, she had not once, that the woman had ever heard, handed the opening of a serious confrontation to anyone else. And she had given it away now without any apparent struggle at all, had simply said the 4 words and moved on. Let her lead it. The woman returned to them, over and over, in the hours that followed. Counting the register, walking home, lying awake, for words from the one person in that town who never surrendered the front of anything, and she found that she could not hold them in her hands without something in her chest going warm and solid and steady. He walked through the door at 4 minutes past 11. She had known, in some part of her, exactly what he would be wearing, and she was right. The coat he had bought in another country 3 years before and had been so pleased with, worn to every winter thing for 2 seasons like a small quiet trophy. He came in the way he came into every room, his eyes moving with the practiced efficiency of a man who assessed rooms professionally. Who? Where? What does it mean? He clocked the man in the booth without knowing who he was. He clocked the boy behind the bar. He clocked Ilsa, visible through the doorway of the office. And then he found her. And she watched his face when he found her, and she saw the thing move across it before he could stop it. Not quite fast enough, though he was very good, among everything else he was, at recovering. He had expected her diminished. She understood that with sudden, total clarity. He had built a picture, over the weeks of scouts and questions, of what a woman does to herself alone in a strange town with nothing. Exhausted, fragile, out of options, making the best of a bad situation and ready, underneath it all, to be rescued from it. And what he found instead was a woman standing behind a bar she had rebuilt, in a room she had reshaped, with straight shoulders and steady hands, and the particular quality of presence that comes from doing real work in the real world, day after day, and finding out each day that you are capable of more than you were ever allowed to believe. He recovered fast. She gave him credit for that. He had always been good at recovering. But she had seen the thing before he buried it, and they both knew she had seen it. He crossed the room and sat at the bar, 3 stools down from the boy, who did not look at him, and she felt a brief, fierce gratitude for the boy not looking at him. "Nice place," Grant said. "Thank you. What can I get you?" A beat of surprise he didn't quite manage to hide. She had done it again. Taken his frame and replaced it with her own. He had come in ready for a reckoning, and she was treating him like a customer who'd wandered in for a drink. "Just coffee," he said, "if you have it." She poured it. She set it in front of him. And then she said the thing she had decided, in the cold hours, that she was going to say. Not loud, not sharp, but clear. "You drove across 2 states, Grant. You sent 3 men ahead of you before you came yourself. You arranged a whole situation last week with a boy who works here just to see how the people in this room respond to pressure. That's a great deal of effort. So let's not sit here and pretend either of us doesn't know why you're here." The bar was not silent. It was open. There were other people. There was noise. But in the particular corner of it where he sat, something went very still. "I want you to come home," he said. "I know. Whatever happened between us. Whatever I did that made you feel you had to run. Don't." She said it gently, completely. "Don't do the version where you don't know what you did. Not here. I'm not going to argue with you about whether it happened. I'm not going to sit here and let you reframe 7 years in real time, the way you do, until I'm the one apologizing. You know what you did. I know what you did. Let's not insult each other." Something moved in his face that she had seen only rarely across all those years. The specific expression of a man who has just been spoken to in a way he did not plan for and has not yet decided how to handle. "You're different," he said. "Yes. This place. It isn't the place, Grant. It's me. I was always going to be this. You just worked very hard, for a very long time, to make sure I never found it out." His jaw tightened, a fraction. She saw it. He set the coffee down without drinking it, his hands too still, that controlled stillness of a man managing a response that wants to be larger than the room will allow. "I have a lawyer," he said. "I assumed. So do I. Her name is Diane Okafor. She's in Portland. She's had my case for 3 weeks." That was true. She had called Diane Okafor from the storeroom on a Tuesday, on her lunch hour, with all the composure she could assemble, and the lawyer had said, in the flat, efficient voice the woman had since come to think of as one of her favorite sounds in the world, "I'll need documentation. Can you get me documentation?" And the woman had said, "I've been documenting for 2 years. And Diane Okafor had said, "Then we're already ahead." And it was here, into this pause, that Ilsa came out of the back and set a folder on the bar. It was not thick, perhaps 30 pages, but it was neat, ordered, the work of someone who knew precisely what they were doing. Grant looked at it. He did not touch it. "What is that?" he said, and the warmth had gone out of his voice now. This was the other voice, the one she had heard only in rooms with no witnesses, the one that dropped the performance entirely. 3 years of financial records, Ilsa said. Correspondence. Statements from 4 people, 2 of whom, I understand, have been wanting to have a certain conversation for some time, and haven't been able to. She paused. "Regarding some of your business practices, and some patterns of behavior, professional and otherwise." The color changed in his face. The woman watched it happen. She had imagined this moment. Not this exact one. Not this configuration of bar stools and coffee and fog past the windows, but something like it. The moment Grant understood that the one advantage he had always held, the advantage of knowing more than everyone in the room, of holding the information no one else could see, had been quietly reversed while he wasn't looking. "These are copies," Ilsa said. "The originals are in 3 places. One of them is with Ms. Okafor in Portland. The other 2, she shrugged. "You don't need to know. This is coercion," Grant said quietly. "It's documentation," Ilsa said. "There's a difference. Documentation is what you give to lawyers, and, when it's appropriate, to courts." And the woman understood, standing there, the full shape of what Ilsa had done, because she had never asked for this, never known it existed. She looked at Ilsa, and Ilsa met her eyes for just a moment, and the woman said, later, that she asked without quite asking, and Ilsa answered without quite answering, that she had been building this file since the second scout walked into her bar. For weeks. Quietly. Using resources the woman hadn't known she had, and she had never said a word of it. Not because the woman couldn't be trusted with it, but because, as Ilsa put it, in the plainest possible way, when the woman finally asked her outright, "You had enough to carry." Grant looked at the folder, and at Ilsa, and at the woman, and the performance was gone now. all of it, and what was left underneath was just a man who had run out of room. "Nora," he said, "what do you want?" She set down the coffee pot, and she told him, "I want my name back. I want my career back. Not the one I had with you, the one I'm building now. I want the next 30 years of my life to have nothing in them that you put there. And I want you to stop. The scouts, the lawyers, the pressure. I want you to stop all of it, and let the process be the process." She paused. "You do that, and the folder stays exactly where it is. In 3 places. Gathering dust." A silence, long enough that the boy at the end of the bar shifted his weight, long enough that the man in the booth set down whatever he'd been holding. And something in Grant collapsed. Not visibly, he was far too practiced for a visible collapse. But she felt it, the way you feel a change in the pressure of a room. The specific concession of a man who has just understood, perhaps for the first time in his life, that he has lost something that was never his to keep. He buttoned his coat. He stood, and he looked at her one last time, and there was something in it that was complicated and human, and not entirely performance. Something that lived, somehow, in the same space as the love he had once sworn was real. "You were always going to end up somewhere like this," he said. And she could not tell, then or ever, whether it was an accusation or a recognition. "Yes," she said, "I was." He turned, and he walked to the door, and he went out through it. And he did not look back. "Let me stop here, because you just watched it happen." He walked into that room believing he still owned her. That 7 years of making a person small could not simply be undone by that person deciding to stand up straight. And he walked out with nothing. If you believe that every person like her deserves to get their life back, every version of her who is standing in a doorway somewhere right now, trying to find the courage, then comment the word "she's gone." Say it for all of them. And if this story has meant anything to you at all, share it with one person who needs to hear the thing it's really about, which is that it is possible to walk out, and it is possible to stay out. The papers came on a Tuesday, 3 weeks later. Diane Okafor called to say that he had signed all of it. No contest to the division of assets. No challenge to the documentation. His lawyer had called that morning and accepted the terms. And the woman stood among the bourbon cases in the storeroom and listened, and counted 30 seconds, and then carried a case out to the front, because there was work to do, and the work was hers. Ilsa offered her the title that same afternoon, sliding a single page across the back table. Operations Manager. A compensation that was well beyond what she'd been making. She had written it up, she admitted, the week before the papers were signed, before any of it was certain. Because, she said, the papers had nothing to do with it. And the woman said yes. It was the man from the booth who told her, days after, what Ilsa hadn't, that the way she'd rebuilt this place, the systems and the numbers and the quiet reordering of everything, had begun to travel. That 2 other owners up the coast wanted the same thing done to their own rooms. That her rebuild was becoming a kind of model. She would help build it out across the other rooms, each with its own dynamics, its own trouble. And she asked him, then, to do it with her. Her read of systems, his read of people. A complete picture. He looked at his glass for a long moment. And then he laughed. A real one, brief and surprised, the first she had ever heard out of him. And it moved through his careful face and left it changed. "Deal," he said. And he took her hand across the bar, a grip firm and brief and completely honest, the way he was and had always been. And near closing, on a quiet Friday, the boy asked her the simplest and most direct question there was, the way only he could ask it. "Are you happy?" And she thought about it honestly. Not the answer that would close the conversation cleanly, but the real one. She thought about the $91, and the sign in the fog, and the $60 on a table, and the lock that was hers, and the folder in 3 places, and the 4 words let her lead it. She thought about all the seconds she had counted, and the fact that she had stopped needing to count them quite so often. "Yes," she said, "I think I am." Because here is the truth of it, the thing that took her the whole of that story to understand. The woman who arrived at that bar with nothing did not find herself there. She remembered herself there, someone who saw systems and fixed them, who walked into rooms full of pressure and found the third option no one else believed was there, who could stand in a doorway with an envelope and 20 minutes and make something better than it was. She had always been that person. 7 years had nearly buried her. And a room full of the men the world had told her to fear had, without ever quite deciding to, handed her back the shovel. And somewhere east of all of it, A man in a fine coat drove away through the fog and understood, slowly, in the way of a man intelligent enough to eventually understand even the things he most wished not to, that she was gone. Not just from the house, not just from the marriage. The person he had spent 7 years shrinking was gone, and what had replaced her was someone he had no framework for at all. He drove, and he did not look back. And behind him, in a bar that had once been a place everyone told you to fear, the woman picked up the next order and filled it and moved on to the one after that. And the work that was hers went on. And the 30 years she had asked for stretched out ahead of her like a road she had only just found the beginning of. She kept moving. And if a bar full of the men the world told you to fear can become the safest place a frightened person ever walked into, then maybe, just maybe, we have spent a long time judging the wrong people. If this story moved you, subscribe so the next one finds you. And I'll see you in the next one.